it was a city like any other. The hum of life echoed down these cobbled streets, while its people lost in their daily routines remained unaware of the terror creeping in the shadows. But in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1962, a quiet storm was about to unleash, one that would change the city forever. The first whisper of a killer, waiting just beyond the everyday life, would strike. His name would become one of the most feared in American criminal history. But it all began here, in an apartment building, on a summer's day like any other. June 14, 1962. A woman, Anna Sleezers, 55 years old, living alone in a modest apartment, never imagining that her life would be violently stolen from her in the most brutal of ways. Anna was a woman of routine, her life simple and unassuming. But on that day, as the sun rose lazily over the city, the last vestiges of normalcy slipped away for Anna and for Boston. It wasn't like Anna to be absent without word. She was a creature of habit, always on time, always predictable. But this morning, when her neighbors came by to check on her, something felt wrong. The apartment manager and a concerned neighbor soon arrived. The door was unlocked, and the officer stepped inside, his hand instinctively reaching for his radio as the silence pressed against him. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn tightly, and the air felt heavy. But it wasn't just the silence that screamed danger, it was the disarray. Furniture had been displaced, papers scattered across the floor. Anna Sleezers was found lying lifeless on her bedroom floor. Strangled. The method was shockingly simple. A nylon stocking had been used to take her life, a personal weapon, something familiar and close. Her death, though horrific, was only the beginning. The killer had chosen her, not at random, but with chilling precision. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Only a quiet, calculated act of violence. Anna Sleezers would not be the last. Her name would soon become the first in a long list of victims, each one found in a similar way, strangled in their own homes, their deaths as sudden as they were brutal. After the brutal murder of Anna Sleezers, the city of Boston seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. It seemed like an isolated incident, a terrible tragedy, but one that could be explained. Yet, soon, the unthinkable began to happen. Days turned into weeks, and then, on July 13th, another woman, Jane Sullivan, was found dead in her apartment. Strangled, just like Anna. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Only the haunting signature of the killer's twisted method. At first, the police held on to hope that Anna's death had been a random tragedy, but now, with Jane Sullivan's murder mirroring Anna's in every way, they knew this was no coincidence. The killer was out there, and he was getting bolder. The fear spread quickly. Each new victim was found in their own home, strangled with their own stockings, just like Jane and Anna. Women living alone, their safety shattered by a faceless predator who seemed to know exactly who to target. Police were desperate for answers, but every lead brought them back to the same dead end. The killer's method was chillingly methodical. The victims, always women living alone, always targeted for their vulnerability. The city was gripped in fear, and yet, no one could pinpoint the killer. As the body count continued to rise, the question on everyone's mind grew clearer and more urgent: who was this killer? Was he someone in the city, or was he an outsider slipping in and out unnoticed? With each new murder, the police grew more frustrated. They had no solid leads, no connections between the victims, and no idea who the killer could be. Was it a random act of violence? Or was this a serial killer, operating with terrifying precision? Then, amidst the confusion, a chilling realization dawned: the murders were connected. not just by their brutality, but by the cold, calculated way in which each victim was chosen. The killer was hunting and he had a pattern. The killer was no longer a phantom, no longer a random monster in the shadows. He was a hunter, stalking his prey. And the question was no longer who will he strike next. It was now how long until we catch him. What had started as a single tragedy had now escalated into something far more sinister. The Boston Strangler was real. And now, with each new victim, the fear grew, consuming the city. But could the police stop him before he struck again? The Boston Strangler had left a chilling trail, and with each new victim, the pressure on the police mounted. The city was in the grip of fear, and the detectives were running out of time. Detective John O'Keefe, who had been working tirelessly on the case, was determined to find the killer before another woman became his next target. He knew the key to solving the case was hidden in the patterns, in the subtle details no one else had noticed. O'Keefe spent days going over witness statements, crime scene photos, and autopsy reports. He found nothing unusual at first, until one thing caught his eye: each victim had been found at night, in their own homes, with no sign of forced entry. As the investigation deepened, O'Keefe began to uncover another chilling detail: the victims had been selected at random, but there was one thing they all had in common: each was living alone. O'Keefe's suspicions began to form. The Strangler wasn't just targeting random women, he was hunting for victims he knew would be vulnerable. Living alone, with no one to hear their screams, no one to protect them. With each lead, however, the investigation grew murkier. Witnesses couldn't recall anything unusual, and the killer's method remained a mystery. No one saw him enter the homes. No one heard a thing. The killer was always invisible, like a ghost in the night. But O'Keefe wasn't ready to give up. He returned to the evidence, looking at each crime scene again and again. Then, something clicked. It wasn't just about the women, there was something else. A pattern, not of the victims, but of the places they lived. The more he examined the locations, the more he realized that the killer wasn't just targeting women living alone, he was targeting specific neighborhoods, places where he could blend in, where no one would question his presence. O'Keefe and his team started to focus their attention on the neighborhoods where the murders had taken place, hoping to find a lead. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and family of the victims. But despite their efforts, the killer remained a ghost. Time was running out, and the city was on edge. With every unanswered question, with every missed lead, the killer grew bolder. O'Keefe could feel the weight of the case pressing down on him. The pressure to find the Strangler before he struck again was unbearable. Months passed, and the pressure continued to mount. The city lived in constant fear, the victims' families left with nothing but grief and unanswered questions. But then, on a cold November night, Detective O'Keefe had his breakthrough. O'Keefe had been reviewing the case files one more time, trying to piece together the small details that everyone else had missed. He noticed something he hadn't seen before. One of the victims, a woman named Helen, had a small scar on her wrist, a scar that matched a description from a witness months earlier. The witness had described a man seen near the scene of the crime, tall, unremarkable, and with a noticeable scar. It was the first real lead in months. O'Keefe was struck by the coincidence. Could it be the same man? Was this finally the clue he needed? O'Keefe quickly cross-referenced this new lead with the case files. It was clear now there was a pattern. The killer didn't just select women at random, he knew them, or at least, he knew how to get close to them without raising suspicion. The idea of the killer having some personal connection to the victims began to take shape. It wasn't just about random vulnerability, he was carefully selecting his targets. O'Keefe's hunch was starting to make sense. The killer must have been someone who had been in and out of the neighborhoods, someone who had access to the women without drawing attention. But O'Keefe couldn't afford to waste any more time. He needed to act fast. He called in a team of detectives and began combing through local records, looking for any connection between the suspect and the victims. As the team dug deeper, they found a link. The scarred man had worked briefly as a janitor in the building where Helen had lived. He had a few run-ins with the law, but nothing significant enough to raise suspicion. Yet, O'Keefe now believed he had found his man. O'Keefe and his team moved quickly, securing a search warrant for the suspect's home. When they arrived, they found the chilling evidence they needed to make an arrest: photos of all the victims, along with personal details, things only someone close to the women would have known. The suspect, Thomas, was arrested that evening. The news spread quickly through the city, but for O'Keefe, the sense of relief was fleeting. Yes, they had caught the Strangler, but the true horror was only beginning to sink in. Thomas was more than just a killer. He was a man who had been watching, waiting, blending into the shadows for years. O'Keefe could feel the weight of the case lift slightly off his shoulders, but he knew there was still so much more to uncover. Why had Thomas chosen these women? What had motivated him to kill in such a brutal, calculated manner? The answers were still out there. The arrest was only the beginning. While Thomas sat in custody, his past began to unravel in horrifying detail. What had seemed like a simple case of a man acting alone turned out to be far more complex. O'Keefe was about to uncover the dark truth hidden beneath the surface. Thomas, however, remained silent. He refused to confess, as if enjoying the torment of the detectives, knowing they couldn't fully understand the scope of his crimes. O'Keefe's instincts told him that something was off, something deeper, more terrifying than they could comprehend. But then, after weeks of dead ends and failed interrogations, Thomas finally spoke. His words were cryptic at first, almost a taunt. He claimed to have helped his victims, to have given them a gift before taking their lives. O'Keefe felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just murder. This was something darker. The more they dug, the more chilling the revelations became. Thomas had meticulously studied his victims. He knew them better than anyone else. He had been watching them for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His victims weren't just strangers to him, they were his obsession. But what sent shivers down O'Keefe's spine was the discovery of a hidden room in Thomas's apartment. It was like a shrine, walls covered with newspaper clippings of the victims, their life details, their family members, their habits. Thomas had been stalking them long before he ever made his move. In the center of the room, a small, locked box. Inside, O'Keefe found something he didn't expect: a journal, handwritten by Thomas himself. In it, he described his rituals, the emotional and physical torment he inflicted upon his victims, and his twisted belief that they needed to suffer to achieve some higher purpose. The journal painted a horrifying picture of Thomas's warped mind. He believed his victims were chosen, that their suffering would bring him closer to some kind of divine understanding. His method of killing wasn't just about ending lives, it was about punishing them for reasons known only to him. But what troubled O'Keefe most was the realization that Thomas wasn't alone in his beliefs. There were others out there, people who shared his distorted view of the world. The journal hinted at a network, a group that Thomas had been in contact with. The Boston Strangler may have had allies. With the new lead in hand, O'Keefe called in experts in cults and criminal psychology. He needed answers. What was this network, and how far did it go? As he waited for the experts to arrive, the weight of the case began to sink in. The Strangler might have been just the tip of the iceberg. O'Keefe knew that the investigation was far from over. If there was a network, it would be much harder to dismantle than just capturing one man. He was about to step into the unknown, into a world of madness and obsession. And in that world, he wasn't sure who the real monsters were anymore. The chilling discovery of Thomas's journal was only the beginning. As Detective O'Keefe dug deeper into the network hinted at by the pages, a horrifying reality began to unfold. The Boston Strangler may have been just one cog in a much larger, sinister machine. And this machine, O'Keefe feared, was still operating. The journal pointed to a series of underground meetings, places where people gathered, shared ideas, and planned their acts of violence. These weren't random, disorganized killings. They were part of something far more structured, a twisted belief system that stretched beyond Thomas himself. The more O'Keefe uncovered, the more disturbing it became. There were codes in the journal, cryptic messages that led him to a secluded building on the outskirts of the city. This building, he would soon learn, was not just a hideout, it was the center of the entire network. As he arrived at the warehouse, O'Keefe's pulse quickened. The place was far from deserted. Inside, there were signs of recent activity. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, and the floor was littered with old, crumpled notes. These weren't just random markings, they were part of a ritualistic pattern. O'Keefe's heart pounded as he entered the room further, knowing this was no longer just about finding Thomas. It was about exposing an underground movement that had been operating in the shadows for years. This was bigger, darker, and more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. In the corner of the room, a set of wooden crates sat against the wall. O'Keefe approached them, his hands trembling as he opened one. Inside, he found more journals, each one belonging to a different member of the network. Each person had their own twisted view of the higher purpose they believed in. But the similarities between their writings were undeniable. One journal, in particular, caught his attention. It was written in a language O'Keefe didn't recognize, symbols that twisted and curled into something sinister. The messages were even more cryptic, with references to a master who guided them all. O'Keefe's instincts told him that this was where the heart of the network lay. As O'Keefe pored over the journals, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The group wasn't just about murder, they believed in something much larger. They believed in purging the impure and elevating those they considered worthy. It was a cult, built on manipulation, control, and the promise of transcendence. O'Keefe knew that this group wasn't just confined to Boston anymore. Their influence had spread. And he had uncovered just the tip of the iceberg. The question now was how far their reach extended and whether anyone could stop them before they struck again. The revelation hit O'Keefe like a blow to the chest. This was no longer just a city's crime spree, it was a full-scale network of fanatics. And now, it was his responsibility to bring it down. But as he stared at the map, O'Keefe knew that this was only the beginning of a much darker journey. The relentless rain outside could not drown the cold light of the desk lamp in O'Keefe's office. An unopened envelope, covered in fingerprints, lay on the desk alongside unread reports. O'Keefe, a seasoned detective, could sense that something was wrong in the city. Everything appeared normal, yet a nagging feeling started to take hold of him. The atmosphere in the room felt heavier than usual. The sound of rain tapping against the windows seemed to echo the sense of impending doom. O'Keefe sat back in his chair, contemplating his next move, as if the city itself was watching him. A sudden phone call shattered the silence. The shrill ring echoed through the quiet office. O'Keefe's hand shot out, grabbing the receiver. The voice on the other end was barely audible, but the words were unmistakable: "Look into the case in the East End, and you'll understand what I mean." Before O'Keefe could respond, the line went dead. A sharp click, and nothing more. He set the receiver down slowly, his mind racing. This wasn't just another routine call, it was a warning. O'Keefe, known for his methodical approach, wasn't one to follow vague instructions. But something about the message gnawed at him. The East End, he'd heard whispers of strange things happening there, rumors of an underground syndicate. His curiosity piqued. O'Keefe knew there was no turning back. The detective knew his city well, its underbelly, its streets, and its dark corners. But this felt different. He had no idea who had been behind that cryptic message, but he knew one thing for sure: he had been pulled into something much larger than himself. Without hesitation, O'Keefe grabbed his coat and hat. He had a city to explore, a mystery to unravel. His instincts, honed over years of cases, told him that the answers lay hidden within the East End's shadows. The city streets were slick with rain as O'Keefe stepped into the night. The air smelled of wet pavement and gasoline. The hum of the streetlights overhead contrasted with the eerie silence that seemed to envelope him as he approached the East End. As O'Keefe entered the East End, the pulse of the city seemed to change. The usual noises of the urban sprawl faded, replaced by a low hum of something deeper, something unseen. He could feel eyes watching him, following his every move. He wasn't sure what awaited him here, but one thing was certain: this was where it all began. O'Keefe was about to step into a world that no one had spoken of, a world that would change everything he knew about the city he called home. The East End had its secrets, and as O'Keefe ventured deeper, those secrets began to unfurl. Each corner, each alleyway, whispered a story. The soft murmurs of the past blended with the present, and the detective could sense something shifting around him, like the city itself was holding its breath, waiting. He stopped at a corner where the streetlights barely pierced the thick fog. A lone figure stood there, leaning against a dilapidated wall, eyes hidden beneath a hood. O'Keefe's instincts flared. This wasn't just an informant. This was a player in a game much larger than he had anticipated. The figure spoke first, their voice low, almost a whisper. "You're the one asking questions. The one looking for answers." It was a statement, not a question. O'Keefe remained silent, his gaze narrowing, waiting for the next move. Without warning, the figure stepped forward, revealing just enough of their face to be recognized: an old ally, a former informant turned reluctant friend. But why was this person in the East End? What did they know that could turn O'Keefe's world upside down? "You shouldn't have come," the figure muttered, almost regretful. "There are things here that even you won't be able to undo." The words stung O'Keefe more than he expected. He had faced the darkest corners of the city, but this felt different. This felt personal. O'Keefe, always calm, felt his patience thinning. "Tell me what's going on. Who's behind all of this? Who's pulling the strings in this city?" His voice cut through the stillness, more a command than a question. The figure paused, as if wrestling with an internal struggle. Then, they spoke again, slower this time. "It's not who you think. It's never been who you think." They reached into their jacket and pulled out a small, tattered envelope, handing it over to O'Keefe. O'Keefe's fingers brushed the envelope, the paper feeling heavier than it should. He didn't need to open it. He could feel that this was the key: the truth. But what was the truth? And why did it feel like a trap? "You'll never escape it now," the figure warned, their voice laced with regret. Once you open that, there's no going back. You'll know too much, and there's no turning off the city's pulse. O'Keefe tore the envelope open, ignoring the warning, and pulled out a single photograph. It was an image of a man he had never seen before, but the face was unmistakable, a man with connections to the highest echelons of power. O'Keefe's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the East End anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. O'Keefe's heart raced as he moved swiftly down the alleyway, the photograph still clenched in his hand. Every step echoed with the weight of his decision. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: this was the moment that would change everything. Ahead, he could see a door, slightly ajar. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he couldn't. The photograph, the secrets, the betrayal, it all led him here. And now, the truth would come crashing down. He pushed the door open, the creaking sound resonating like a final warning. Inside, a figure stood waiting in the center of the room. The man in the photograph. The one who held all the answers. O'Keefe's breath caught in his chest. "I knew you'd come," the figure said, their voice smooth, cold, and calculating. "But you won't like what you find here." There was no remorse in his words. Just a calm certainty. As if this was all part of a game he had already won. The man took a step forward. "You think you've uncovered something monumental, O'Keefe. But this is just the beginning. You opened a door you can never close. You've seen the truth, but you have no idea what it means." O'Keefe's mind raced. What was this man talking about? The truth he sought seemed so elusive, like a mirage slipping through his fingers. But now, more than ever, he needed answers. His past, his future, they all hung on the precipice of this moment. But before O'Keefe could respond, the man raised his hand. "There's something you don't know," he said, the smile never leaving his face. "You've been following the wrong trail. The real power? It's much closer than you think." Suddenly, the world around O'Keefe seemed to distort. The walls pressed in on him. He could hear the pounding of his own heart, the sound deafening in his ears. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was his life unraveling before him. The truth he sought was more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. With a sharp gasp, O'Keefe realized the truth. The man was the key, but not in the way he had thought. He wasn't just a villain, he was a mirror, reflecting the truth O'Keefe had been too blind to see. The choices he had made, the paths he had taken, they all led here. And there was no turning back. O'Keefe lunged, his instincts taking over, but before he could act, the man vanished. The room was empty. The truth was gone. Or was it? In the silence that followed, O'Keefe knew one thing for certain: he would never be the same. The city's secrets had become his own. What do you think of O'Keefe's journey? The truth, the betrayal, the choices he made, where do you think it all leads? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay with us as the story unfolds. We'll dive deeper into the secrets of the East End soon, and you won't want to miss it. Thank you for joining us in this thrilling ride through the heart of mystery and deception. Stay tuned for more, because the truth is always waiting, hidden just beneath the surface. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and keep questioning.